All right. Good morning, all. Sorry for the glitch. Feel free to, for those of you joining us online, just feel free to send a ping or a text either to myself or actually just type a comment on the YouTube channel. Let us know if you're having any problems, but it should be fixed now. It looks like a couple of mics were conflicting. So that said, happy Sunday, all. Hope you're all doing very well. How are you guys doing? Tired. So I say it's our medical students here up in the front. They always look tired. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open us in prayer. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to just remind you that this is a time of fellowship with the Holy Spirit. So let's just take a moment and divorce ourselves from the world. And Holy Spirit, we invite you into this room, and we invite you into the rooms of all those that are watching us online now. I pray for a special sense of connection with you like never before. I pray you'll speak to people's hearts, into the deep recesses of people's hearts that are usually closed or forgotten by the world. We pray that you'll bring healing and refreshment, Lord, and conviction where it's needed. So we just lift this service up in Yeshua's name. Amen. Lord, let's weird our viewers out now. Let's rise for the Shema. For those of you new joining us today, this is the Shema. And this is something that Jesus himself said when he was questioned by a Pharisee. And then he blew the Pharisees away because what he did was something new, but it really wasn't new, it was old. And this is something that God had commanded from the beginning. If you can master what's here in the Shema, Shema in Hebrew means listen, it's a command. If you can master this, you've nailed the entire Bible, you've nailed all the prophets, and you don't even need a pastor anymore. But unfortunately, this is really difficult for us to do, so we say it over and over again to remind ourselves. So on three, 2, 1, go. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you rise up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. Amen. So if you can love your Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, like the person we're going to see today, if you can love your neighbors yourself, ladies and gentlemen, you've nailed all the law and the prophets. You'll become the best believer, the best Christian you can be. So the last 2 weeks we saw Saul, his increasing hostility, that is King Saul, his increasing hostility towards the new young anointed King David, who's about maybe 19, 20 years old. David is seen as a threat by Saul. As we saw, that Saul is becoming increasingly mercurial, meaning more unstable, wild in his manners. He made 2 physical attempts on David's life. He tried to literally kill him with a spear. But when those failed, King Saul moved on to some other plans. He tried to scheme to have David killed through his enemies, the Philistines. That is, he would try and send David out into impossible missions where David would certainly be killed. But it didn't stop there. King Saul would cheat David out of his wife. Saul would use his wife to try to get David out on the battlefield, but when that failed, he didn't even give him his wife. He said, okay, the wife that I was supposed to give you, I'm going to give it to another man. So finally, David does end up marrying a woman of Saul, but it was a different woman. Her name was Michal. That was the second daughter. And Saul didn't stop there. He tried to use her to get David once again killed on the battlefield. But as seen, God was with David. And Saul's plans not only failed, they backfired radically. They magnified David. David became increasingly popular because when David was supposed to be killed out on the battlefield by the Philistines, he would come back by killing the Philistines in double numbers. So no matter what Saul tried to do, his plans failed. They backfired and they served to elevate David. So David became increasingly popular among the people. God was preserving and protecting David. How so? Well, he was granting favor for David in the eyes of the Israelites and among Saul's own family. The daughter, Michal, and then Jonathan, the son. They both loved David and they protected David. So what's more, David was protected on the battlefield. But as we're going to see this week, events for David, for King David, who's done nothing wrong, he's not sinned against King Saul, events went from bad to worse. Today we're going to see more attempts on David's life, and we're going to see the full expulsion of David from the house of Saul. So David's going to begin his journey in exile. The remainder of 1 Samuel, in fact, probably 11 or so chapters are devoted to this exile, so we're not going to cover all of it, but in the next coming few weeks, we're going to survey some of it. It won't be until 2 Samuel, the book of 2 Samuel, where we actually see David reigning as king. So today David's going to be kicked out of the house of Saul, and he's going to be in the wilderness for something like 12 years. So today we're going to begin to discuss that exile. Now, King David, the woes, she's anointed king, but the woes are just beginning. But in these woes and in the beginning of this expulsion, we're going to see the best of David's character and some things that we can learn for ourselves and things we can adopt into our own spiritual lives. So as part of this, what we're going to do is we're going to see some of the operations of the spiritual realm in David's life. Further, we're going to see some of the Psalms that David wrote during these times of trials, and we're going to see just how David's heart was close to God, in tune with God. And you're going to see somebody that was really, really close to God to the point where you're going to, wow, what does he have that I don't? All too often, when we read Psalms for ourselves, we tend to take snippets out of it and apply it to ourselves, which is okay. But if you read the Psalms out of context and in isolation, like one Psalm here, one Psalm there, you kind of miss the bigger picture of how and when and why they were written. You're going to see that once you understand David's life a little bit more, the Psalms become all the much more richer. And then that way you understand them more, and then you can apply them for real in your own life. Okay, so today we're going to begin in chapter 19 of 1 Samuel. So read along with me. So verse 19. And Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. See that? Kill David. Remember, David's been anointed king already. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. And I will go out there and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you, and if I learn anything, I will tell you. So here we see the increasing hostility of Saul against David. In the past, Saul was a little bit more discreet about killing David. He tried to do it more in the dark recesses where people weren't around, because he knew that if he killed David, that would maybe cause a civil uproar, because a revolt, because David was very popular. But now we're seeing the hostility become more out in the foray, more out in the open. And now Saul is just becoming so desperate, he doesn't care what other people think. So now his entire household knows, and so do the servants. Verse 4. And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, let not the king, please, father, Saul, don't sin against King David. Or he didn't say king there, but he knows he's anointed. He says, don't sin against David, because he has not sinned against you, and because David's deeds, have brought good to you, King Saul. For he took his life in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine, meaning Goliath, and the Lord worked a great salvation for Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why will you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause? Verse 6. And Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. And Saul swore, okay, Jonathan, as the Lord lives, he's going to break that promise really soon. He shall not be put to death. I will not kill David. And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan reported to him all these things, and then Jonathan brought David before Saul, and as things were like they were before. Probably that David was a little bit on edge, but here we have the godly Jonathan. Unlike his father, Jonathan is godly. He intervenes on David's behalf, and he reminds his father, King Saul, father, David has done no wrong against you. He's been anointed king, but he didn't choose that. Samuel came and anointed him king. He's totally innocent. He's done nothing wrong with he's kept all your commandments. He's never plotted once against your kingdom. Do not take his blood. Do not kill him. He is the anointed king. If you do that, you are killing God's anointed. That's a warning. And for at least for a season, for a little while, don't know how long, Saul is alleviated. And now Saul is ostensibly reconciled with David. Or was he? Let's go to verse 8. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and struck them with a great blow so that they fled before him. Then a harmful spirit, we're going to get to this in a moment, then a harmful spirit from the Lord came upon Saul, as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand, and David was playing the lyre. Here we go again. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall, meaning kill him with the spear. But he eluded Saul, so that he struck the spear into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. So goes the lasting peace, or the temporary reconciliation. Now, as mentioned, it's worth pausing here. We read something here of a harmful spirit being sent from God. Now, this is not the first time we've seen it. We saw it in 1 Samuel 16. But this kind of raises the question is, how can a harmful spirit come from God? It's kind of a question of like, does God cause evil? And I had to read this both in the Hebrew and in the Greek to just make sure that the translation here is rendered correctly. But the Hebrew, the word it's best translated as evil. In the Greek, it's actually the word porneia, we use the word porneia, pornography. And that can be translated as bad or laborious or something that taxes you or something that makes you very, very tired. But anyway, the adjective means something that's best translated as kind of evil or bad spirit. So if I were to translate this literally, I would say an evil spirit from God came to Saul. So what's the meaning of this? Does God send evil spirits to inflict people? What do you guys think? Does God send an evil spirit? Does God cause an evil spirit? Allow it? Okay. Well, if you...
Cause.
Sorry?
Maybe not cause, but allow.
Cause or allow? Well, I'm going to challenge that. Let's see. If you survey the Bible, I would be tempted to answer yes. Why so? Because if we read the book of Job, we actually see a very clear instance of God causing a spirit to go to one of his godly servants. I'll show it right now. Let's go to Job chapter 1. This is famous, verses 6 to 7. One day, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. So they're in the heaven. God is in the heavenly realm with his angels. And Satan, this is the word Satan. It's the actual word Satan. That means deceiver. Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And then Satan answered, "Well, Lord, I was roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth." Verse 8. Then the Lord, watch this carefully. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth," meaning he's supremely godly. He keeps all my commandments. "Have you," God speaking to Satan, "have you considered him? He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Now, a little background here. Job is probably the oldest book in the Bible written, and he's recorded. There's no sin recorded in his life, although he was a sinner, is a human being. But there's no sin recorded that we know of. And there's no sin that he committed that would prompt God to send an evil spirit towards him. God was in the heavenly realm with the angels doing whatever they do, and the spirit was wandering all over the earth, and then God initiated the conversation. He started the conversation. He went up to Satan and said, "Have you considered my servant?" Remember, Satan was wandering around looking probably for someone to torment, but God initiated the conversation. He caused Satan to consider his servant Job. And what follows is approximately 50 chapters of miserable trials that Satan would inflict on Job. Job would lose his house, his children, his finances, and his health. And some say his teeth fell out and he got open sores all over his body. And he would take shards and try to scratch off the sores because he was miserable. And in the end, Job is never even told why any of this happens. God, for unrevealed reasons, decided to test or prove Job. Who started it? Who caused it? God. Yeah. So here we see a precedent for God, quote, sending out evil or an evil spirit which performs evil. And what's more, we see elsewhere in the Bible, God who sends out good angels, not evil angels, to do harm. Where do we see that? How about Exodus? Remember the angel of death? He sent an angel out to go and take the firstborn of every household in Egypt. If that's not enough for you, what about the book of Revelation? Who opened up the scrolls? Who's opening up the scrolls and delivering judgment or God's wrath on mankind? It was the angels. God sent them to what? Bring judgment on the earth. And what's more, we read throughout the Bible, or the Old Testament, where God would raise up evil nations, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, to deliver what? Judgment, cause harm on his own people. And famously, here's one example here, Isaiah 53:10. Let's go there. "Yet it was the Lord's will," get this, the Lord's will to crush or to cause him to suffer. Cause who to suffer? Jesus, Yeshua. "And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he sees his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand." So what's being said here? Isaiah 53 reveals the will of God in crushing Jesus. Jesus, if anyone, is supremely innocent, the least deserving of all people who ever walked the earth to receive any pain or any judgment. Yet we see God unjustly inflicting Jesus. So yes, we do see God using or causing, or maybe allowing, I would say causing, it's a strong word, causing agents to inflict harm on people. Now, I can't fully reconcile all the pain and suffering caused by God on Job. The reasons are undisclosed. But in other cases, we can say more clearly that God does cause pain and suffering or send angels to go out and cause harm. We see this in Saul's case. Remember, when we surveyed these, the death of Jesus, the rising of nations against Israel, and then the judgment inflicted on mankind by God by the opening of scrolls in the book of Revelation, we see a common element among all these. What do we see? We see the judgment and the punishment of sin. God was punishing and judging sin. And I need to stress, ladies and gentlemen, that the punishment of sin is painful. It's not comfortable. When you're punishing someone, you don't do that by making them feel good or comfortable or offering them massages or whatever. You inflict pain or something commensurate with the crime or sin that they've committed. So yes, God does in fact inflict pain, and he does use evil agents as tools of judgment. And we got that? He uses tools of judgment. He's just in doing that. Now returning to Saul, ladies and gentlemen. What is the state of Saul's spiritual condition? King Saul's spiritual condition. What is the status of his kingdom, his kingship? Is he still king? In name only, and ostensibly. Who's been anointed king? David. David's now the king. Who is not giving up his power? Saul's still holding on to his realm. He's holding on to he's not relinquished his kingdom in accordance to God's will. He's saying, no, I'm just going to hold on to the kingdom. And now he's trying to kill to preserve it. So not only is Saul not willing to relinquish his throne, he is trying to kill God's anointed. You guys get that? Saul is living in outright rebellion and in defiance of God's will. So now Saul is under and worthy of God's judgment. We saw last week that God removed his spirit of protection from Saul, and now that he deserves punishment. So returning to the question of the goodness of God or the harmful spirit coming from God, when he sent out an evil spirit, what is God supposed to do? We have a wicked and defiant king ruling against and contrary to God's will. And now he's attempted murder. He's committed almost attempted murder against his anointed. And this wasn't limited to David. Saul at one point was threatening to kill the prophets, the priests, like Samuel. So God would be unjust by not sending out a harmful spirit to inflict Saul. Saul is living in total rebellion. If Saul repented, if Saul withdrew and said, okay, here's the king, what do you think God would do? Do you think he would send out a harmful spirit? Probably would say, I'll forgive you, but now you need to relinquish your throne to my anointed. So the torment of the spirit resumes in Saul's life, and now Saul's mercurial tendencies, meaning his wild behavior, his emotional mood swings, if you will, return. And now he tries to kill David yet again. Fortunately, or providentially, David escapes. Let's return to 1 Samuel chapter 19, will be verse 11. So Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. There it is again. He's going to try and kill David, kill the anointed. But Michal, that's Saul's second daughter, David's now wife, she told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. So alas, Jonathan's reconciliatory words only had a temporal effect on King Saul. Saul's now back to his old ways. The truths, the reconciliation was only temporary. He nearly kills David, so David has to flee again. And now David goes to his house. His house is believed to be on the outskirts of the town, maybe by the temple, the wall of the city. Why so? Because Michal was able to lure him out, and he was able to escape, so he was probably near the wall. That's where the house was. Let's read verse 13. Michal took an image and laid it on the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair on its head and covered it with clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, oh, he's sick, servants. Dad's servants, please, look, he's sick in bed. And then Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed that I might kill him. And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed with the pillow of goat's hair on its head. Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me as thus, and let my enemy go so that he has escaped? And Michal answered, oh, David said to me, let me go or I will kill you. So Saul, true to his rage, sends messengers to David and to his daughter's house. David was forced to flee. He runs away. And you'll note that the word here, I don't like this translation, but it says image, Michal dressed up an image. In the Hebrew, teraphim, that literally means it's kind of an idol. So she took an idol that they had in their household, and those idols, probably even David's household, were commonly believed to maybe increase fertility. So maybe they had one on the shelf in the corner that if they believed that they had it in the house, that, oh, we can get pregnant. So she probably took that image, she dressed it up with goat's hair and put it in the bed. That's a side note. But anyway, she spares David's life. She lies to the servants, and she lies to her father, saying, well, David was going to kill me if I didn't let him go. Now, I can't speak fully to Michal's lying, but God was preserving David even through this, even through her sin. God gave favor to David through her and through King Saul's son, Jonathan. And those two would be instrumental in preserving David's life. So even from Saul's own household, David was being protected and spared by God. And here begins the full exile of David from King Saul's household. David would now be a fugitive for years to come. So David's about 19, 20 years old, and now his whole life he's been cast out. Now what follows, I want you to watch this very, very carefully. Watch what David does after he's lowered out a window and runs, flees with his life. He's by himself now. Remember, this was a commander of armies. Now David fled and escaped, and he came to Samuel at Ramah, and he told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and lived in Naioth, and it was told Saul, behold, David is there. Again, David's about 20 years old. He's nearly been killed 3 times. He's been spied on. He's been defrauded. He's now been forced to leave his own household and his wife behind. He's on his own. He's a fugitive for doing nothing wrong. That's not just, is it? His whole life now is going to be confined to the wilderness, and now he's going to really have to put his faith, the faith that he's been exercising for his entire life, into practice. He's lived as a shepherd. He's dealt with cold. He's dealt with fear of predators at night, and he's dealt with protecting his sheep when in isolation. But he had God the whole time, and now he's going to put that faith against the test. Now here's what I want you to notice. Where does David go when he flees? Where did he go? Samuel. The only safe haven that he knows. Notice that he didn't go home. Now it's not stated in the text in the Bible, but my suspicion is that David didn't feel safe at home. Saul would look there, but also the relationship between David and his household wasn't exactly the best. The father, the brothers didn't really treat him well, and they weren't very godly. In fact, maybe the older brothers who were loyal to Saul might have reported him. So David had nowhere to go. Where does he go? He goes to God. He goes to Samuel, and by extension of that, God. That's not a bad choice, ladies and gentlemen. That's the best place. That's the only place you can be. So he seeks cover and protection from the most godly man in Israel at the time. That was Samuel. And by extension, that God himself. So what happens next with David gone? Does Saul say, he's out of my household, he's out of my town, we're safe? Does he relent? Let's see, verse 20. Then Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw that the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. When it was told Saul, he sent yet more messengers, and they also prophesied. And then Saul sent messengers a third time, and they also prophesied. So no, Saul does not relent. It's not enough that David has lost his wife, has been kicked out of the household, is living in isolation as a fugitive. He needs to kill David. He wants to kill David, so he pursues him. He goes to where Samuel is. Saul has no fear of God whatsoever. It's kill David no matter what. It's not enough that David's been evicted and is living in exile. Saul is in a mad rush, born out of consuming fear of loss of his kingdom, and jealousy. So he wants to destroy David. Now David is without defense. He has no army, no armor bearer alongside him. He is defenseless. So where does he go? He goes to the priest. He goes to Samuel. But even then, it's not safe there, since Saul doesn't care. He will go kill priests too. So what is David's defense? God alone, ladies and gentlemen. Here we see God stepping in directly. Notice that when people don't have their armies with them or their weapons with them, that's when people see God act the mightiest, if you will. God comes in, and what does he do? He causes the messengers of Saul to, probably it's best translated as an involuntary trance, but what happens is the messengers of Saul come to where David is, and they're forced to go into a state of prophecy, more like a trance state. So they're trying to either abduct him, arrest him, or kill David, but they're forced to prophesy. They cannot act against David. This happens not once, not twice, but 3 times. So the messengers here are unable to kill David. David's under the full protection of God. Well, after 3 rounds of this, Saul's had enough. So he decides he's going to try and take the matter into his own hands. Verse 22. Then he himself, meaning King Saul is fuming, went to Ramah and came to where the great well is. And he asked, where are Samuel and David? Notice not just David, he wants Samuel too. Saul is he's crossed the Rubicon. He is unrestrained. He will kill anyone. He's very dangerous now. And one said, behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah. And then Saul went there, and then look what happens here. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul also. And Saul, it goes a little bit further. Saul stripped off his clothes, and he too started prophesying before Daniel, and he lay naked all day and night. Thus it is said, is Saul also among the prophets? Now, there's a little bit of debate here as to whether Saul actually was stripped down naked, but what he does do is he strips off his royal garments. Whether that means he was actually naked or not, doesn't really matter, but what's significant about that? His royal garments are stripped off and laid on the ground. Anyone want to take a stab as to what that could mean? God made him do that. It's like, imagine this. You have a crown. You're forced to take off your crown, forced to take off your royal garments, lay it on the side. What message is that? God's saying, you're not the king. You are not the king. And then what's more, Saul is forced to prophesy. God's saying, you're not the king. You are not going to touch my anointed. See here, there's no army. David has nothing. Do you think Samuel doesn't have an army? They can't defend themselves. They are totally, completely dependent on God. So this signifies that Saul literally is not the king. And here we see God very active in the role of the preservation of David. If you watch this very carefully, it's easy to gloss over this. We read this, but they prophesy, okay, what does that mean? Then you kind of gloss over it. But if you read this very slowly, pay attention. God is acting very loudly, very visibly. It was God, ladies and gentlemen, who sent the evil spirit to torment Saul. It was God who gave favor to David from Michal and Jonathan. And it was God who was supernaturally preventing Saul and his servants from harming David. You see this? God was pulling all the strings for David. So while God was preserving David, even though God was doing this, David's life, this is not to say David's life was easy, it was still hard. For the next 10 years or so, he gets anointed, he actually reigns as king at age 30, he's age 20 now. For the next 10 years, David's going to live a life of exile, kind of like a Robin Hood existence, where he's moving from cave to cave to cave, running away from Saul. I was almost going to put a map. It looks like a spaghetti pattern where David's going here, because that's where he's fleeing. That's how he's fleeing from Saul. He's constantly being pursued by Saul and Saul's army. Yet, in these wilderness experiences, during this period, we see the best of David. As we're going to see in upcoming messages, never once did David ever plan to kill David or to seek retribution. In fact, he tried to honor Saul despite all this. He had multiple opportunities to kill King Saul, and we're going to see that later, but he wouldn't do it. In fact, he would rebuke and even kill one person that would try to make an attempt on King Saul's life. So despite all this, David's character never broke. It would never compromised. David would continue to honor Saul as best as possible. What's more, we would see David rely very heavily on God during this wilderness experience time. And this is the time that he would pen some of his greatest psalms. I'm going to read a few of them here. There's too many, but some ones that kind of highlight the intimacy that David had with God and how David was relying on God during these. So as I read these, I want you to keep in your mind, I'm King David. I'm running away from Saul. I'm running away from Saul. I did nothing wrong. I lost my wife. I lost my household and everything. I'm living in caves now. I'm now at the mercy of you by Samuel's side. And here is when he writes these famous psalms. So I'm going to read 3 of them. First one is Psalm 18. I read this last week, but let's read it again. Psalm 18, verses 1 to 2. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. Do you see this? David's running away from King Saul, but now he's saying, you're my deliverer. You're going to save me. You're going to save me. The situation looks dire, hopeless. You're going to save me. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge. I hide in your presence. I hide from you. You're my shield. You're the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. You're my protector. You're my guardian. Psalm 34. I'm going to read a couple. Again, these are just too long. Notice David's attitude, ladies and gentlemen, when these dark hours. I will bless the Lord at all times. Not sometimes or not good times. I'm going to bless the Lord even when I've kicked out of my own household and I can't even be next to my wife. I will bless the Lord all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. So he's praising God. Okay, he's running. He doesn't know if he's going to eat tonight. He doesn't know if Saul's going to kill him. Finally succeed with the spirit. But he's saying, praise you, God, praise you, God, praise you. Who does that? I don't. I need to work on that. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he what? Delivered me from all my fears. That's another famous one. He delivered me from my fears. So even though I was scared, even though I thought I was on the cusp of death or losing this battle, God delivered me. One more. Psalm 54, verses 1 to 5. O God, save me by your name, and vindicate me by your might. O God, hear my prayer. Give ear to the words of my mouth. So notice that David's still humane. He's still asking God, God, please hear me. Please hear me. It's okay. Asking for help. Pouring out your heart. See this? There's a relationship here between God and David. For strangers have risen against me. Who's risen against him? Saul, his messengers, and whoever is loyal to Saul. Ruthless men seek my life. They do not set God before themselves. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is the upholder of my life. He will return the evil to my enemies. In your faithfulness, put an end to them. So here we see King David's faith in God. God's going to deliver me. He's going to give me justice. I don't know when. It might be an extended period of time. In this case, it's going to be 10 years of this. Okay, if you guys have something to complain about, life sucks right now for a few weeks or months, try doing this for 10 years. Try running away, having your life being threatened for 10 years straight. These Psalms were written, and there's many more, during David's years of exile when he was fleeing from Saul. David was threatened by Saul's was threatened by Saul's messengers and his army, and his life could have been ended at any moment. Didn't know when. These, ladies and gentlemen, reflect the Psalms. These reflect the heart of David. These Psalms they reveal the intimacy that David had with God. Here we see a man with the utmost confidence in God, and we see a trust in God that would deliver him from his enemies. Furthermore, we also see in these Psalms a loving and a thankful heart towards God. No bitterness, no anger towards God. He's not angry, shaking his fist and saying, why God, why God, why have you allowed this? You anointed me king, why? None of that. He just praised him. Rather, we see perpetual praise and reminders to himself. God, you're going to deliver me, you are good, and I'm going to praise you even though times are terrible now. So I need to stress this again. This kind of faith that David had was not a self-willed or manufactured trust or a faith. That wasn't something that he psyched himself up to do. This was one that was built on years of experience with God. David knew in his wilderness experience that he could rely on God. He saw God deliver him from the lion, from the bear, from his enemies, from Goliath. He saw it, and he was able to develop that confidence because he experienced it. And this confidence and this faith that he developed in his earlier years in the wilderness as a shepherd would be used again now. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we leave David's world and return to our own for now, I want to encourage you all to reflect on David's trials when we encounter our own in our own day and age. Remind yourself that if and when, it's going to happen, not if, whenever you find yourself asking yourself, why me, why am I suffering, whatever, you guys will have to fill in the blank, we all have our trials. Consider David's plight. Consider David's situation. So if you're facing, I don't care what it is, financial, health, whatever, family, ask yourself, wait a minute, what was David's situation like? How did David act? Remember, David did nothing wrong. And yet he still experienced miserable trials, but he patiently endured them. Plus, also consider when you encounter your own trials, consider how God was with David and how David relied heavily on God through the trials. Note how, where, and to whom David fled when in trouble. Where did David go when things got really bad, when his life was he had to run? He went to God. He went to Samuel. David trusted God implicitly because he experienced God's deliverance in the past, producing, again, I'm going to say this, I'm being repetitive on purpose, an experiential-based faith, not a will-powered one, not one you have to, God's going to save me, God's going to save me. I just know, no, and you don't really believe in your heart. David didn't have to do that because he knew it. Also, consider and remind yourself when you have your trials come along, that same God, this is the same God, we're not talking about a God of the ancient past, this is the same God. That same God who delivered David is the same God who will deliver and protect you. Think about that. Now, admittedly, that's kind of difficult to see because we tend to think God's remote and distant, and also we don't see God act a lot, but a lot of the reasons why we don't see God acting a lot, it's largely because of ourselves. How so? Because most of us don't spend the time developing that trust and relationship with God like David did. David was doing it all the time, all the time, all the time. We usually don't do it. We're busy with our lives. Busy, busy, busy. And what's more, when our trials do come along, we usually don't run to God or to our Samuels. What we do is we try to construct our own solutions. We rely on our own reasoning, our own logic, or we go to our own friends and we try to solve our own problems. We don't run to God. That's why we don't see God act the way in our lives that we see in David's life. We usually don't spend the time necessary to develop that relationship with God, and therefore to see see those experiences, those answered prayers, or maybe those healings, or whatever it is. If you spend time hanging out with God, I guarantee you're going to start seeing God act, and then you're going to know, and you're going to be able to take that faith to your future trials. And I remember one of the pastors that we minister alongside with does the homeless ministry. You guys met him, Pastor Joe. He mentioned something very interesting when we were out on the homeless center in Atlanta. And we were witnessing to some people on the street, and he came up to me, Pastor Joe said to me, we see miracles here, but you know what? You don't see them all the time because God doesn't act all the time. But the more you're out here, the more common you're out here and putting yourself on the field, you're going to eventually start seeing God act. So the lesson I took away from that is hang out with God, spend more time with God, and then you're going to see God act. So lastly, I'll say, ladies and gentlemen, I'll remind you that David's faith was something that was years in the making. This wasn't something that David I was born this way. No, he developed it, and it took years to do it. You too can do that. If you don't have that or never done it, today is a great time, or now is a great time to start to do that. We can become King David's too. We can have his faith. We're going to ask right now for God's help in getting that faith, because I trust and I hope that you all want it. And so, Heavenly Father, we lift this prayer request up to you now. For all those listeners online and for those here today, we ask you, Lord, please give us that willingness to give us first the desire to have David's faith, and then help us, Holy Spirit, partner alongside us, come alongside us, and encourage us, remind us to spend time with you. It's a matter of just hanging out. It's not a legalistic thing. It doesn't have to be in a church building. It doesn't have to be liturgy. It just has to mean hanging out with you, talking to you about everything, sharing everything with you, praising you all the time, acknowledging you. Look at the trees over there. Thank you for answering my prayer last week, or whatever. Or God, you're just good. Do that, do that, do that. It's like any relationship. You cannot have a good relationship of trust, built on trust, with any human being if you only spend 30 minutes a week with them. You need to spend time as if you're in a marriage. That's when relationships build. So with that, Lord, I ask every single person who's said yes in their heart to that, to pursue that time, to carve out time and hang out with you, God. Pray this in Yeshua's name. Now, I'll close with the benediction. I'm going to read the Aaronic benediction in Hebrew and then in English. So receive this blessing, ladies and gentlemen. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'el Adonai panav alecha v'yuchanecha. Yisa Adonai panav alecha v'yasim lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. God bless you all. See you next week.